I think most of the themes that we're going to discuss tonight are themes that most of us are familiar with. Not going to necessarily blow anyone's socks off, but I think it's kind of important to kind of collect all the ideas and put them together, because as Jews we know we don't believe in JC, we don't believe in Christianity, we don't believe that he was the Jewish Messiah or some sort of deity or the Trinity, all that nonsense. But I want to just go through systematically, break it down, what happened, what's the story, what's the history, what's the background, what's the perspective that the Jews have on early Christianity and the development of their religion, kind of a little bit of a historical sense as to what was going on at the time and kind of how this sect that sprouted out of Judaism was kind of a pattern at that time, why it was so, and then going through like the reasons, just what are the qualifications of Messiah, did Jesus fulfill them? Right, what are the accomplishments of Messiah? Did he fulfill them? Just going through systematically and see what we find. Because unsurprisingly, not only he does not fit any of the qualifications, he did none of the achievements that were needed. Part two, I was going to talk about the the sources in ancient or in old, in classic Jewish literature about Yeshu, who may or may not be Jesus, because it's very interesting. A lot of people say, oh, the Talmud says this, the Talmud says that. It's very interesting if you actually examine the Talmud in the sources, many of them that were censored out of the Talmud. But if you actually look at the sources, it's very interesting to see what our sages thought was important to convey about Jesus and how exactly they said what they said. Either way, I want to just point out that for, if I say the word Jesus is okay to say the word that is associated with the C, right? That we don't say because that is a name that may or may not be a name of an idol. We don't like talking about idols, and we don't want to we don't just go and praise Jesus. He's not the Mashiach. Where the term comes from, the word Christ comes from the Greek word Christos, which means anointed one, which is the ancient practice that we have in Judaism. You have a king, he gets anointed. You have the Kohen Gadol, they get anointed. They pour special oil on them. He fulfills none of that categories. We don't anoint him. He's not any Mashiach. So just if you hear me saying JC, that's what I'm referring to. Okay, so what's interesting is that the Jewish response or the Jewish perspective on Christianity is not so heavily emphasized. And interestingly, like we look at the period, the historical JC is very hard to find. You look at Christian sources and even Jewish sources. We don't have any sources in the Mishnah talking about JC. We have some in the Talmud talking about Yeshu. Yeshu, maybe Yeshua Natsri, which is the Hebrew name that's associated with him. There's grave doubts as to whether or not that's even referring to the Christian Jesus. Because we find actually two narratives in the Talmud, both of them incidentally from the book of Sanhedrin. Both of them talk about a fellow by the name of Yeshu, and clearly these are not referring to the same guy, because one of them lives about 100 years before the Common Era, and one of them it's dubious. It's not clear where he's. It's ambiguous. Then we have another account in the Talmud from the book of Shabbos and the book of also Sanhedrin, where it talks about a fellow by the name of Ben Stada. Or Ben Pandira, which are terms that seems to heavily indicate that this is referring to at least some version of the guy that we're talking about. This person exists in the 2nd century of the Common Era. So, from Jewish sources, it's not clear if we're actually talking about the same guy. But even from Christian sources, I got the second Dave. Even from Christian sources, we have no contemporary accounts that this guy actually even existed. The earliest of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are written between 30 and 60 years after the guy is purported to have lived. So we have a big void with regards to documentation as to this person, did he ever live? Now, my point is, at least for the purposes of our discussion tonight, we're assuming that he did live. We're not going down that path. But we don't have, it's important to note from the get-go, that the historical JC is a little bit hard to, don't pardon the pun, nail down. It's not so easy to find him.
You could say pin down, and then you wouldn't feel so bad.
And so that's that. Dave.
No, you said Ben. Did you say Ben?
Ben means the son of. That's right.
So you're saying that they might have mentioned him in the Talmud, son of
Yeah, well, the Talmud, I was planning on leaving this for the next class, which we won't do. So the Talmud talks about a fellow by the name of Ben Stada,
Son of Stada.
the son of Stada, or who's Stada, right? But who apparently smuggled sorcery out of Egypt with tattoos. And the Talmud says, oh, this guy named Ben Stada, I think his name is Ben Pandira. I was like, so basically there's a whole back and forth. Who is this guy? And the Gemara ultimately says that his mother's name is Miriam Magdala. Okay, that's his mother's name. But she's called Stada because she committed adultery. And his father is a fellow by the name of Pandira. His mother's husband is a fellow by the name of Papas ben Yehuda. So all of that is a long way of saying that if this guy is our guy, then not our guy, their guy, then he is a bastard son of a fellow by the name of Pandira, from the woman named Miriam, who we call Stada because she committed adultery, and she was married to another fellow by the name of Papas ben Yehuda. So it seems likely that this seems to have to mirror a little bit of the story that we're familiar with. What's interesting, by the way, if you look in the Talmud and you find that, if you want to say, oh, let's Google the Talmud, where do you find this? You actually won't find this anywhere in the Talmud because these were all censored out. If you look at any edition of the Talmud, not any edition, because some newer editions, they put them back in, but if you find a Talmud over here, you will actually not find it because it was taken out. There you go, sorry about that. So in the classical edition of the Vilna Talmud, they actually took it out. They didn't put it in, even though, well, I guess it was censored by medieval censors. You get to look at this page of Talmud, you'll notice it's very strange. See, it has this big white spot over here at the bottom. Right? Every other page doesn't have any white spots. Nothing. They all go to the bottom. Every single page in the Talmud goes to the bottom. They printed it with this deliberate, lacking, as if someone took something out because someone did take something out. There's a whole narrative. The biggest narrative is on Sanhedrin 43, and the next biggest one that was taken out is also in Sanhedrin. This time is in 10. Which one is it? Well, the Christians took it out because they thought it was disparaging about their hero. So, oh yeah, oh yeah.
Babylonian.
How can they do that?
Hey, you see this one also is truncated. This is some other notes on the bottom, but this is,
Babylonian.
they cut it out. Either way, so long way of saying that we don't have a lot of contemporary sources. We don't have any, in fact. The Josephus, right? Flavius Josephus, who is the great historian of the time. There are two references in there, but everyone agrees. Not only it's not us saying open up any Google it, then don't trust me. But everyone agrees that those things were actually inserted later because the Christians had faced a major problem that if this guy was so remarkable and so transformative and so dynamic, who lived at the time, and the greatest historian of that time, who was chronicling what was happening to the Jews, makes no mention of him, it might be an opportune, it might be problematic. You would want to insert some reference into that book. But the authenticity of that is very much in question. Now, who executed him? Another big hot-button topic. I don't know how much it matters because, in a weird way, the whole thrust of the religion is that JC died for their sins, which has a little bit of a problem because if I sin today, how does it help that he died for my sins in the past? We'll put that aside. But either way, if JC didn't die for their sins, they would have no hope. So ironically, we should, if we did kill him, we should get all the accolades. We should get high fives. Yet thousands, countless of Jews were killed because we are Christ killers. We committed deicide. We killed our God, which is so bizarre if you think about it. What does it even mean? Like, how do we kill a God? And by the way, if we could kill your God, imagine what we could do to you, right? But most likely the Romans killed him because crucifixion is not a way of execution that we do. We have in the Jewish court of law, there are 4 methods of execution. None of them are crucifixion. Not only that, we know that the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high court, they left the temple site. They were always at the temple site. They left the temple site in the year 30 of the Common Era. 40 years before the temple is destroyed, they leave. They move to a different part of Jerusalem. Now, why would they do that? The reason why is because the rule is that all Jewish courts, wherever the Jews have sovereignty or at least have freedom to administer capital punishment, that is only contingent, or that's contingent upon the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court, being in the temple. So essentially, the Sanhedrin forced the hand of all the other courts that they have to stop adjudicating capital punishment because the Sanhedrin left. If so, if this JC was to be executed by the Jewish court of law, they wouldn't be able to do it between the years 30 and the year 70 because the Sanhedrin had left Temple Mount. That being said, I just want to throw out something that I found in the Tosafot, so the medieval commentaries on this same book on the Talmud, on page 37b. It does say that there were instances where the Sanhedrin would move from Chanut, where they moved in Jerusalem, and move back to the temple, relocate temporarily in order to enable capital punishment to be meted out when it was necessary. And then Tosfos throws out the very cryptic words, Kehahu uvda, like that particular episode. Which particular episode are you talking about? So there are those that want to say that they're actually referencing this particular episode. I don't know. The correct answer is I don't know. But if we did kill him, we didn't kill him with crucifixion. And it really shouldn't be that much of a discussion. It means the point is belabored, I think, a bit too much. In 1963, thankfully, we really needed this, but we were absolved by, I think, Pope Pius.
I thought it was 1968, Juvenile Vitae, Pope Paul.
I'm pretty sure it's 63, but we could check that after the class, or someone could check it now. I'm pretty sure my memory serves correctly. It's 1963. Whatever, either way. In the 60s, but check it out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the history.
Them to do that, I think.
Yeah, we really needed that. That's right.
It's very big of them.
So, if we are to learn a little bit about the time period, so let's start a little bit prior, when the second temple is being built. We're talking about the year 350 before the Common Era. We have Ezra coming back from Babylon, and he comes and he wants to rebuild the temple. He establishes a assembly called the Great Assembly. Men of the Great Assembly. And they do that, which is a unprecedented assembly, because they're faced with an unprecedented problem. For the first time since Moses, or since the nation was founded...
Sorry, that was the wrong encyclical.
I'm sorry? Did I get...
That was the wrong encyclical.
He got it right. You got it.
Okay.
Well, whatever.
I gave you the wrong one.
So for the first time in Jewish history, we're going to have half the nation, in fact, the majority of the nations will be living in Babylon, and the minority of the nation is going to be living in Israel. That's problem number one. How do we have a cohesive, fluid nation where you have people living everywhere, and that obviously is going to that's going to get worse, right, over time. Number one. Number two, there's not going to be any kings. Number three, the Jews are going to live under the dominion of first the Greeks, then the Ptolemite Greeks, and the Assyrian Greeks, and then the Hasmoneans are going to provide a brief period of Jewish sovereignty, and finally the Romans. It's going to be, this state where the Jews kind of are in Israel, but don't have sovereignty, and you're going to have to deal with the new tensions of being subservient to the host empire. Additionally, number four, we have the Jews not having prophecy. Prophecy is going to end towards the end of the first temple. When you don't have prophecy, what happens? Every heretical idea can take ground. Anyone can say, the Torah was made up, or the oral Torah was made up, or the rabbis have no say, or the Sanhedrin's doing something which is against Torah. And you no longer have the opportunity to just go to the prophet, a prophet, by the way, who's vetted and everyone accepts as a prophet, and have them provide clarity. Even the temple itself is going to be lacking many of the vessels of the first temple. So how do we create a religion, so to speak, that's able to persevere through all these challenges? And what they did, they had about 100 years of governing of the people, but much of what we have today in formalized Judaism, like the Tanakh, right? The Tanakh was a product of the men of the Great Assembly. They determined which books went in, which books went out. Our prayer books, right? That was formalized by the men of the Great Assembly. All that to try to... Oh yeah, this members. This is a Sanhedrin. That's right. By the way, the Knesset in Israel today, comprised of 120 members, is modeled after the Knesset Hagdolah, the Great Assembly of 120 members of Ezra. But either way, during this time period, we're going to see a lot of different groups within Judaism. Sectarian groups are going to sprout forth. We're going to have in the third, about this 200 to 300 years before the Common Era, the Sadducees, a fellow by the name of Tzadok. It's in Hebrew, it's called the Tzidokim. Tzadok is a student of one of the great rabbis at the time, and he develops, along with his friend Baitus, who became the Baituthins and the Sadducees, the Tzidokim and the Baitusim, and they develop a theory wherein they reject the premises of the tradition within the oral law. And once again, we don't have the central authority to respond to them. We don't have a prophet. We don't have, the Jews are scattered. And eventually those movements become very, very impactful. We have the Hellenists, right? The Hellenized Jews, when Greek and the Greek influence and the Greek culture was very appealing for a lot of Jews, and a lot of Jews want to become these pseudo-Greeks, like these Jewish Greeks. We call them the Hellenists, the Jewish Hellenists. And we know that the story of Hanukkah was battled over primarily ideological grounds. It was a religious war, much more so than an actual war of a territory or what traditional war has always been about. Right? All that chaos kind of reaches a crescendo when we have the Romans come. The Romans come in, and the Romans are like a heightened version of the Greeks, and they elect, they have their puppet masters in Rome, kind of determining who's going to control what. And they a fellow named by the name of Herod, who wasn't even Jewish, or there's a doubt as to whether or not he's Jewish. And he comes and he starts slaughtering rabbis left, right, and center. But he builds these massive palaces, and he rebuilds the temple, and there's a very conflicted relationship we have with him. But there's heightened tensions everywhere you go, and every afternoon there's another group sprouting out, another pseudo-Jewish group. We have a group called the Essenes. We know them because Josephus talks about them. The Essenes are a group of very, very religious Jews that instead of dropping parts of Judaism like the Sadducees did, they actually added to Judaism. And in Judaism we say don't add, don't subtract, because either way you go, you're going to mess up. So they said, we're going to become very, very religious, and we'll have these ritual baths, and we're going to have this, we're going to become celibate, and we're going to add these other apocryphal books. By the way, we found their books because they lived in caves in southern Israel. And they said, the end's near, and they had placards on both sides, and repent, thy sinner, right? Yeah. That's the kind of people that they were. These apocalyptic, the world's ending, and we better quickly repent, and there's no need to procreate because the world's coming to an end. And let's live in caves and starve ourselves and be celibate. And what happens to such a nation or such a splinter sect? They're gone. But we have today, when in 1947, when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls, according to most historians, these were actually these caves were inhabited by Essenes, otherwise known as the Dead Sea sect. And these Essenes, they had, of course, all the books of the Torah. Especially the book of Isaiah. Ends near, right? But they also had their own book, their own apocryphal book, books that they had as well. For example, there's a famous book that they had. It's called the Battle of Light Against Dark. This real apocalyptic stuff, and that's an example of a splinter set that kind of went off Judaism, but not with dropping observance, but in fact adding observance. And indeed, we find groups that in Jewish literature that we don't find in secular literature. So we have the Hellenists, the leftovers, the Sadducees, the Baitusim, like we said, these Essenes, and we have. I'm sorry.
The Pharisees.
Well, the Pharisees are a name for the Hebrew name for it is Prushim. Prushim means people that withhold. This is what we call the mainstream Jews. The mainstream Jews that withhold from any new innovations we call the Prushim.
Okay.
They said let's just maintain the way it always was. We would call that the mainstream Jews.
And they're the real Jews.
Well, not the real. They're all of them were real Jews at one point, but the Judaism that remained was only the Pharisees. Okay. But that was the same Judaism that emerged. That was the same one that came in, right? Those were the ones who said that of all the offices of leadership that we can follow, let's follow the rabbis. Let's follow the Sanhedrin. But we have other groups called the Sicarium. These are like a bunch of mafias, like these mafia guys they're called Sicari because that was the name of the knife that they used to use to assassinate their opponents. We have the Biryonim. Biryonim is like a variant of that, which we could say kind of these very, very, very religious, very Zionistic, very nationalistic people. People that weren't willing to negotiate with the Romans, and people that were trying to compel us to fight the Romans, even though the Romans were the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, and maybe still to this day the world has ever seen. So you have so many different groups, and of course, as we know, when the Jews fight amongst each other, the Almighty says, okay, you guys want to fight and kill each other? I'll bring in the Romans, and they do an excellent job in that. If that's what you want to fight amongst each other, let's invite the Romans and let's see how they sweep the floor here with you guys. But at that time, we also meet the Jewish Christians. Jewish Christians is another one of these splinter sects that emerges from Judaism in the first century of the Common Era. And the script is not unlike any other one. You have a charismatic student of a rabbi who is a scholar of some repute, who is able to give sermons, is charismatic, and essentially, he's the Messiah or he's a leader. And if you were to actually look at a Jew from that time, or a Jewish Christian from that time, they would look not unlike the rest of the Jews. They still kept Shabbos and still followed, the laws of kosher and the laws of Nida and the laws of Shabbos and the laws of Tefillin, and they had a bris milah circumcision, everything. They went to the same schools, the same shuls, the same mikvahs, the same everything. Right? Same bagel shop, the same Jews. Just they had a fascination with Jesus. Besides for that, and Jesus is dead, they still maintain their fascination with Jesus. Indeed, if that's the way it would have stayed, we would never have heard. Christianity wouldn't exist. If Christianity stayed as a group of Jews with a twist, like the Essenes or like the Sadducees or like the Baitusim or like any one of these other groups, they would have been long gone. None of us would have ever even heard of them. What happened was that there were two major changes that happened. Number one, Paul abrogated the law, right? Whereas Pauline Christianity, not the Jewish Christianity, but Pauline Christianity, where he comes and says, okay, from now on, Christianity is not about Judaism. There's no Torah, there's no laws, there's no nothing. Maybe the Ten Commandments, maybe love thy neighbor as thyself, but that's all it is. Just believe in Jesus, right? That is now, it opens the door to all the Gentiles. And indeed, while it was a very small, maybe growing, but it was a small group of Jews that were involved with Christianity, once the split came, it became very popular because it provided the non-Jews at the time a very exotic alternative to the paganism that existed at that time. Dio Cassius, the great Roman historian, writes that the Romans had in excess of 30,000 gods. 30,000 different gods as official state gods. Because the policy was, when Rome conquers more of the empire, what they do is not only they take the land and they take the taxes and they take everything, they also inherit the deities of the local populace. So the more they conquer, the more gods they have, and they become official gods of the Roman Empire. Right? Of course, in the 4th century with Constantine, that's going to become obviously the Roman, though it's known as the Holy Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire, where Rome embraces Christianity. But that's much later down the line. At that time, once Christianity is split off from Judaism, you have Judaism and Christianity, and those two don't meet. Right? That once you have that, it's open to all the non-Jews, and then it really takes off. Dave.
So I think what you're saying, don't tell me if I'm wrong, is that there was no Jewish authority at the time, no centralized Jewish authority, and there was a manifestation of Paul, which created Christianity.
Well, I wouldn't say there was no centralized Jewish authority because the Sanhedrin.
Was there at that time?
Oh, the Sanhedrin was there.
But
Just
it wasn't
it,
ruled.
it wasn't. It wasn't strong. It wasn't strong Jewish. It wasn't unquestioned Jewish leadership.
There were
You know.
too many splinter groups.
Yeah, there are a lot of different groups. That's right.
And just
That's
too
right.
many others.
And Paul abrogated the law and opening it for the non-Jews, and that obviously made it it was very popular. It was very exotic, if you will, and it took off very much so with the non-Jews.
Did
Go ahead.
Paul do this after the destruction of the temple?
I think so. I don't know the exact timeline.
Because that would have made it simpler.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's afterwards.
Yeah.
I know it is afterwards
Yeah, it
because we have the Talmud tells us in the Book of Brachos that the Shemona Esrei prayer. Everyone knows the Shemona Esrei prayer. What does the word Shemona Esrei mean? 18, because it's 18 verses, right? Well, 18 blessings. But if you actually count them, it's 19. The reason why is because the men of the Great Assembly established 18. And then Shmuel HaKatan, right, one of the scholars, after the temple is destroyed, he says, let's establish a 19th blessing. And that's the blessing of Olam Al-Shinim, which is essentially a curse to the Jewish Christians. Why? Because there were Jews and there were Jewish Christians, and you wouldn't even know if your neighbor, who, by the way, whose son may marry your daughter, if they're a Jewish Christian. How would you know? They were closet Christians. But now what they would do is anyone they suspected to be a Jewish Christian, they would put him up and say, okay, why don't you lead the services? He's like, lead the services. What does that mean? It means to curse yourself out and all your friends, all your colleagues. So he says, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't lead the services. I said, you're sure? You're not going to lead the services? You know what that means, right? It means we can out you as a Christian. But ultimately later on, once Christianity became its own religion entirely, they didn't have that problem. And by the way, this is maybe more relevant to what I would have talked about next week. There is a tradition that Paul may indeed have been faithful to the Jews to the end. We know Paul started off as Saul, Saul of Tarsus, and he was initially crusading against the Jewish Christians, but ultimately became the leader. And he was the one who abrogated the law. And then there's another guy by the name of Simon Peter, or Shimon Peter, or Shimon Poter, who was the first pope, and he essentially gave a stamp of approval to Pauline Christianity. And that character is the hero of a book called Toldot Yeshu, which is the which is a book that outlines, that delineates the Jewish perspective of early Christianity's development. And it talks about one of the rabbis going undercover, right, creating a fifth column, and infiltrating the nascent Christian movement, rising to the top, and then taking them away from Judaism. So the guy who suggested it in the Council of Rabbis said, okay, fine, why don't you do it? I was like, okay. So he infiltrates that movement. He rises to the top, becomes the Bishop of Jerusalem. He eventually moves to Rome, becomes the first pope, and he is the one who ushers in Pauline Christianity as the official, as the official version of Christianity.
And that's Peter.
That's Peter. That's right. And by the way, we have prayers in our Jewish prayer books that were authored by this guy. Not only that, we have accounts of letters that he maintained with the rabbis, where he wrote letters to them, and they have the correspondence back and forth, even though he's masquerading as the leader of this Christian movement. Very interesting. And by the way, today was the 10th day of Tevet. In this Toldot Yeshu Hanotzri, this book that talks about the Jewish perspective of Christianity, so it says that he died on the 9th day of Tevet, and that's why there's a fast on the 9th day of Tevet. And if you look at the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, it says that on the 9th day of Tevet, we have a fast, but we don't know why we fast, which is bizarre. If you know anything about Jewish law, we don't just say things, let's all fast on this day, but we're not going to tell you why. And the real reason why is because Shimon Peter, he died on that day, and we can't say he died on that day because we can't let people know that he's actually one of us.
That's unbelievable.
Very interesting. Either way, go ahead.
How does John the Baptist fit into all of this?
Well, I'm saying we're trying to give this the
I
the
understand
Jewish
that, but
perspective.
he
So there's
was
a lot
roaming-
of characters
He
at the
was
time.
roaming around at the same time.
A lot of people roaming.
Independent of.
A lot of people roaming at that time. It was a time for roamers.
Yeah.
You were there.
Okay, so,
You're a little older than me. So you were probably there.
Now, another change that happened.
Previous.
Another change that happened, which also brought Christianity further and further away from Judaism, was this whole question as to the identity of JC. Is he a Messiah? Maybe that's how it started off, or is he some sort of deity? And there has been contradictions in Christianity ever since. That's why so many different little groups of Christianity. I have a great quote here. Through the 2 millennia of its existence, Christianity has waged war upon itself, basically because it never clearly defined itself to the satisfaction of all its would-be adherents. Number one, the concepts of the two natures of Yeshu, of JC. Is he a physical, some sort of Messiah or healer or soother or sorcerer or whatever, or some sort of God? All the problems with the Trinity, right? How do you have 3 parts of one? Is it 3 or is it 1? Which one is it? Let's virgin birth. What's the idea of the virgin birth? Isn't that a clever way to avoid the problem? Maybe we don't know the dad is. Maybe there's an easier answer, right? Maybe whenever you have a doubt, go with the simplest solution, right? The woman separated from her husband and suddenly she's pregnant. Maybe there's another guy that we don't know about. Who married, the one married, the two marries, the original sin, all the pagan and pagan rituals and symbols in Christianity, as we know, December 25th, is indeed borrowed from a Christian, from ancient pagan religions. All these problems, indeed, were, have always plagued Christianity. And indeed, we have the famous Council of Nicaea in the year 325, where essentially a group of bishops get together to determine what we believe, which is bizarre. Imagine 300 years after the founding of the religion, you say, okay, well, we have a religion. It's very powerful, but what do we actually believe? And indeed, that's when they determined which books are in the final canon and which ones are not. And thus, they opted for the ones that present JC as more of a divine quality, and the other ones that got rid of and banned and burned, which is interesting, right? If you're trying to actually present an honest, legitimate perspective, you don't ban and burn the books that you disagree with. But not only that, like the identity of Jesus is the most important entity, most important line item in the religion, and that had to be determined by vote of a bunch of bishops 300 years after these events even happened, which is ridiculous. But this lack of uniformity actually didn't disturb the Christians from pursuing their interests. Oftentimes those interests involve killing Jews. The fact that it's not logical what they're trying to sell, or it's not uniform, or there's major problems with what they're trying to propose, that never stopped them from killing Jews or from doing whatever they can to maintain their power. Like we said, the Jews are persecuted for killing a god. Think how insane that sounds. Us, we're persecuted today, and people hate us today because we killed their god, which, first of all, I didn't kill anyone, right? What does that even mean? The whole thing is ludicrous, but that hasn't stopped them, right?
It's just another excuse.
But exactly. But our perspective has always been for these past 2,000 years is that we categorically, unquestionably reject Christianity and JC and all that nonsense. We think it's nonsense. We're not worried that he's going to come back. Like, the people say that, the evangelicals only support Israel because they believe that once the Jews are in Israel, then JC will come back. Support us. Let's get to Israel, and let's wait and see what happens, right? Let's put, do 5 to 1 that ain't coming back.
What did I say? Good luck with that?
Yeah, good luck with that, exactly. But either way, we have rejected it because not only is their story not one that has any credibility to it, not only that, we actually believe that we contributed to the story itself, like we manipulated it, number one. But number two, like, first of all, what are they even selling? Like, we'll have to address it one by one. But was JC the Jewish Messiah? Clearly not. Well, how do we know that? What's the JC? What's the most important role of the Messiah?
Has to be of the Davidic line for me.
Well, that's true. So that's the character profile is of the Davidic line. But what are the most important responsibilities? Well, they have to usher in the Messianic era. Well, what does the Messianic era look like? So we find that there's no famine, there's no war, there's no envy or hump for competition, and no other pursuit in the world will take anyone's interest other than pursuing God. Has the past 2,000 years looked like a bloodless one? Has there been, no envy or no competition? And do people have any other interests aside from God? The big question is if people are even interested in God, right? But we find the history post-Jesus to not at all be in line with the messianic prophecies. That's number one. Number two, what are the qualifications of the Messiah? So we have, number one, Maimonides tells us he has to be king from the house of David. We know, it's been widely accepted and established, that to be a king of the Jewish people, you have to come from the house of David. Now, what does that mean? It means your dad has to come from the house of David, and your granddad, and your great-granddad, and your great-great-great-granddad. Well, what if you don't have a dad? Right? Or what if in the book of Luke, chapter 3, and the book of Matthew, chapter 1, it gives us two different paternal grandfathers? Which one are we following to get back to David? Your own books, right? The canon of the Christians in two places give us different paths to get to King David. Which one is it? But also, if we're dealing with the virgin birth, we can't get to King David. Studies Torah and performs mitzvahs like David's ancestors. We find that JC was actually not someone who upheld the tradition of his ancestor David. There's in the book of John, chapter 9, it talks about that he didn't even obey the Shabbos. You don't obey the Shabbos. He wasn't even observant, or at least not totally observant.
Did he come from David, or did he not?
Of course, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. Either way, there's millions of people that come from David, right? That doesn't prove anything. But we don't know for sure that he did come from David. But even if he did, it wouldn't mean anything because he's not actually someone whose personality, whose behavior, whose activity is in line with that of Messiah. He's going to compel the Jews to Torah. He brings the Jews away from Torah. He's going to fight the wars of Hashem. He did the exact opposite. None of the four personal qualifications of Messiah that are brought down did JC fulfill. Not only that, what about his accomplishments? Let's look at the accomplishments the Messiah needs to do, and let's ask ourselves one by one. Did JC do it? No. The answer is by all 7 of them. Number 1, did he rebuild the temple? No. Number 2, did he gather the Jews from all far-flung corners of the earth? No. Number 3, did he reestablish Jewish law over Israel? Number 4, did he reinstitute sacrifices in the temple? No. Number 5, did he fix the entire world to worship God? No. Number 6, did he reestablish the Jewish Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin? No. Number 7, did he restart the Jewish calendar laws such as the Shemitah and the Yovel? No.
Where did these 7 laws or rules come from?
Well, Maimonides collects them, so he organized it in a nice, clear fashion, but none of them were fulfilled. None of them. And other ones that we mentioned are verses throughout the Tanakh. So none of them. Why should we ever consider that JC is our guy? Why? It seems so bizarre. Why? We never did and we never will because he fulfills none of the qualifications.
None of the qualifications that we perceive.
Well, but we're the
I
Jews. I'm saying
understand. I
that's
understand.
true. That's true. But they're working with the same documents, right? They are trying to prove from the Torah that he's the right guy, but he isn't because we're using the Torah and we're saying that he's not the right guy.
They go to the New Testament. They don't-
Well, right. But the New Testament, that comes afterwards.
Right, I get it, but that's where they get their authority from. It's the New Testament.
Okay. Well, you can make up a even newer
I'm not saying
Testament.
I'm saying they're wrong. I agree with you, but that's where they
Well,
get their
no.
justification.
Their only justification can be from the Old Testament, because otherwise you can't change the rules to say that you're the guy, right? Because the rules are predate him. They tried, of course, but they can't do it. So if we actually.
Led to him being a Jew, so obviously.
Oh yeah, exactly. And we also have to realize that this whole thing is entirely different than the way it was when he was actually alive.
It was from the New Testament when they admitted that he was a Jew, so it has to start from there.
Not only that, we have so many verses that it's even ludicrous we to even talk about this. But the idea of a man being some sort of representation of God is so insane. It's so ludicrous from our perspective. We have lots of verses. We talk about Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that God is not capable of having any sort of interface with us. We talked about this in previous classes in this very same room, that it's not possible for us to have any interaction with God in our physical realm because God's not physical. It's not possible for him to be physical. There's no form. There's no body. Right? Exactly. We've said that. But there's even verses like the verse in Numbers 23. God is not man that he should be deceitful, nor son of man that he shall relent. Right? We can't work with God the same way we work with man. We say the Shema, the Shem Echad, not one, not two, not three. Not multiple parts, only one. We say that. That's in our mezuzahs. That's in our tefillin. We say that every day, morning and night. There's no God but me, Deuteronomy chapter 32. But I'm just picking. But there's a lot of sources, and this has been so widely accepted. And by the way, even Jesus himself accepted it. Right? It's just nonsense that was made up afterwards. I'll just mention, like for us, we view Christianity as idolatry. It's idolatry in a way that's not similar to Islam. Islam is not idolatry. The God of Islam is the same God that we have. Right? One will be allowed to walk into a mosque, but not into a church, because walking into a church is a house of idolatry. You can't walk into a house of idolatry. Right? We have to give up our lives and not transgress idolatry. It means we have to give up our lives and not embrace Christianity. Right? That's one of the cardinal sins, idolatry. Christianity would fall into that category.
So Rabbi, we're not allowed to walk into a church?
Yeah, well, are you allowed to walk into a house of idolatry?
No. So,
you can't
so
walk
if we
into
know somebody who's having a wedding or something, we're not just not
Sorry,
allowed to go.
they're coming.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. But not only that, we have to ask ourselves the most important question. On what basis are we accepting, or are they accepting, the fact that JC is special in any way? Like, we have no historical contemporary documentation, right? We have the books that were crafted by people with a very very sharp agenda hundreds of years later. And let's even assume that the guy did miracles. Let's assume that he did miracles. Let's assume that. Let's assume that that's true. Doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove anything. I'll tell you, well, why not? Why don't miracles prove something? Even to be a prophet, miracles don't prove anything. Right? We have loads and loads of you read the Tanakh. How many miracles you find? Right? Elisha reviving the dead. Does anyone say that Elisha is Messiah or Elisha is God? No. Elijah doing his miracles. Right? All the prophets, but even later on, we find the Tanaim, the first, second century rabbis before and after the Common Era, doing loads and loads of miracles. Does anyone for a second say we have Tanaim splitting the sea, reviving dead, going into the higher realms, the paradise, like Rabbi Akiva did? Rabbi Eliezer was able to somehow, take a whole field and have all the produce just come together as one. No one for a second ever claimed that because someone does miracles or what we perceive to be miracles, it proves anything. Right? Moses splits the sea, right? That we have testimony of millions of people. Did anyone say that Moses is divine? No. Did anyone say Moses is Messiah? No. Maybe he could have been. But we don't consider things that are illogical, that a man is God, no matter how miraculous that man can be. If someone does a miracle today, we have testimonies of hundreds of people that saw a fellow by the name of the Baba Sali, who was a great rabbi, lived in Israel, died in 1984. He did miracles, and we speak to 100 people that they saw it. Now, he didn't revive 10 people, not that I know of, but he used to take a bottle of wine and wrap it around with a handkerchief, a bottle like this, and pour for 50 people cups of wine. I don't know he did it. I don't know, maybe, I don't know. All I know is that I spoke to someone who said I was there, and I was like looking at the bottle, clearly, because everyone knew there's this shtick that he would do, and he did it. Is it a miracle? Maybe yes, maybe no. Who knows? But even if it was a miracle, so does that prove anything? This is the 1980s. This is contemporary times. What does that prove? The fact that we can digest is a miracle. The fact that it's common makes us not think that much of it. But you tell me, the fact that you're able to ingest food, Are you able to separate the vitamins, the minerals, and all the things that you need from things that you don't need and just get rid of the waste? That's not a miracle? That's not miraculous. It just happens to be that a lot of people are able to do it, so we don't think that much of it. The fact that your heart pumps 89,000 times a day without you thinking about it, being totally unconscious about it, is that not a miracle? Of course it's a miracle. Just thankfully, we're used to it. It doesn't need to be recharged. The batteries don't need to be recharged for 90, 100 years. Unless it does, right? Unless you need a pacemaker or whatever. Right? But that's not, why does that, that's also miraculous. Miracles are everywhere that you want to find them. But that the miracle proves nothing. And even if the miracle is outside of the realm of the normal ways of nature, it doesn't prove a thing. We have countless accounts from very reliable sources, much more reliable, with contemporary people that actually saw these things happen, miracles, and no one would ever suggest that the people that performed these miracles were anything but regular, standard, ordinary humans. Well, maybe extraordinary humans, but still humans nonetheless. So we have literally nothing that we should believe. I'm sorry?
Is it supposed to be videotaping?
It was going to turn off after a while. So
So I got a question for you, but I don't want it.
go ahead. You want it on videotape?
No.
You want it off? Okay. So the biggest question we have to ask ourselves, okay, give me some evidence that this guy JC is anything other than a regular dude who may have been charismatic, may have been a little bit more scholarly, may have had his hand in sorcery, which was the way I think he was able to do those miracles, if he did them. What is there? There's nothing. What about us? Look at Judaism. What's the founding of our religion? Some guy told a guy or whatever, some guy met had some moment on the way to Damascus, and he's like, is that what it is?
No.
It's millions of people at the foot of the mountain, right? Having prophecy together as one, national prophecy, right? Dramatic miracles that are ever present, not just one time, turned water into wine. We're talking about years, 40 years of what are you eating for 40 years? Mm-hmm. Manna from heaven. How many people are we feeding with? How do we do this long con? Millions of people, manna from heaven, 40 years. It's not like let's do a miracle. I do some shtick that we're talking about a miracle that fed a nation for 40 years, a nation of millions for 40 years. What do you drink in the desert for 40 years? Water from a rock. Show me some of that kind of miracle, and we'll get my attention. Go ahead.
Question: Did Moses create miracles too?
Did he perform miracles? Yes.
Okay. When he was in front of Pharaoh, the Pharaoh's people created miracles too.
That's right.
But Moses didn't.
Okay. There's a great misconception. Maimonides goes out of his way to answer your question. He says, okay, why do we believe Moses?
Moses never claimed to be Yeshua, Jesus, or whatever.
Moses never claimed to be what?
Jesus.
He never said he was the Messiah.
Or Messiah.
He never
Of
said
course
he was
not.
God, yeah.
He never did. Even though he created miracles and
So what?
he took all the Jewish people out of the
So what?
My
I don't think
point
Moses
is,
created miracles.
there's
He
another-
came from God.
Well, he didn't. Right, of course, I'm saying every miracle comes from God. Every non-miracle comes from God as well.
there's another opinion is I have a son. I'm his father.
Go ahead.
Okay, so he carries my last name.
Go ahead.
Adam was created by who?
God.
God. So his father is God. So the human race, father.
Well, you don't have to go to Adam. You go to our prayer books. Our prayer books, we say Avinu Malkeinu. There's a verse in the Torah. Banim atem Hashem Elokeichem. You are sons to Hashem, your God. You don't have to go to Adam. We're all children of God.
That's right.
So what? It doesn't mean that we're divine in any way. We're ordinary physical humans.
Claim of Jesus being a son of God, which he claimed, is partly correct. We're all children of God.
But that's not how it was intended. It's
No, I know.
intended.
We're talking
It was
about
intended that
all
he's
the
something
religions
special
right
and
now.
something better than something different than the rest of us. Of course, all of us we say Avinu Malkeinu. I brought you a verse in Deuteronomy. It says something like that. But you are sons to Hashem your God. But I want to go back to your original point. Moshe, right? Moshe does miracle. Go ahead.
Let me finish. So the issue that I'm seeing in this whole picture is not the claim, but the people making him a God, a separate God.
Well, it's not so clear what they're trying to make him.
Church and whatnot, they created a
It's the
different,
Son of God.
full different religion with their own God. If you go to Christians, most of them don't even realize that he's Jewish.
Okay.
In reality.
Yeah, so what's your point?
So my point is, the claim itself is, it has some legitimacy to it and not. Because the whole agenda behind it and the conflict between is created by pagans and their worship.
But there's no legitimacy of ever giving to human God qualities or God-human qualities. There's no crossover.
Not God,
Go ahead.
sons of God. We are all children of God.
Okay, so there's something special about each and every one of us. I would agree. And I will say, we've talked about this, that we have a neshama, a soul, and the soul gives us God-like qualities. But you don't even have to go to that. We talk about Adam. You mentioned Adam. Adam was created in the image of God. There is some sort of corollary between us and God, right? We are the only two entities that are capable of free will. Only God and humans can make free will. Angels can't do free will. Animals can't do free will. We can do free will. God can do free will. But I'm saying, yeah, you're right that there is some sort of similarity between man and God. But first of all, that's uniform across all humanity. And that's number one. But number two, it doesn't in any way amount to us being capable of being divine in any way. Or having any power onto our own. Not as what God gives us. But your point that you brought about with Moses is a very, very, very strong point. Moses did miracles. Why did the Jews believe him? So Moses comes and says, okay, Pharaoh, you don't let the Jews leave. I'm going to turn all the water into blood. Okay. He does it, turns the water into blood. Pharaoh was impressed, but then he shows his sorcerers do the same thing. Even though they didn't really turn to blood, they just put the food coloring in it. Fine. Pretty remarkable. Moshe's accurate. He's able to withdraw it whenever he wants. Fantastic. Same thing with the frogs. Third time, right, with the kinim, with the lice, the sorcerers of Pharaoh say, wow, this is the finger of God, right? This is something special. We can't do that, right? Moses does a series of miracles, right? 10 miracles, split the sea, wonderful miracles. Why do the Jews believe Moses? Why do they believe? Moses comes and says, I'm going to give you Torah. Correct? I'm going to give you Torah. Well,
the Jews saw all the miracles. What do you mean, why did they believe that?
Do they believe him because of the miracles or not?
Yes.
How well do y'all know your scripture, guys?
Two things. First of all, they were waiting or praying to God for 400 years to be taken away from slavery and so on.
Okay, but why? My question is why they believe Moshe.
Because he
The
said
Torah
God
tells us
said-
why they believe Moshe. Did you know that?
Because not all of us will believe to him at first, anyways. And they're looking at 40 years in the desert. They were constantly challenging.
Yes, they were challenging him. That's true. Let me find it here.
Obviously, none of us know the answer, so we don't know what scripture.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, this is the parsha you guys are doing right
So
now.
there is no actual specific answer.
That doesn't mean we remember everything we talked about. You've had a few.
Here we go. So this is chapter 19, verse 9. This is right at on the doorstep of Mount Sinai. They're about to get the Torah at Mount Sinai. And this is obviously after they have already left Egypt. They've been traveling for 50 days. They've been eating manna for a while already. Moses obviously is a very high profile already. Hashem said to Moses, behold, I come to you in the thickness of the cloud, so that the people will hear as I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever.
We just did this.
We just did this
There you go.
tonight.
So you guys didn't even remember what we learned an hour ago, right?
Trying to
Just
make us
last
feel
thing.
good?
Yeah.
You
Right.
want to keep coming back?
Right, so what do we see? We see that the reason why the Jews believe, this is what it says. Why would the Jews believe in Moshe forever? Because of Mount Sinai. Because miracles, we don't know how miracles happen. It's possible that there's some sort of shtick like the Egyptians did, or there's some sort of black magic of some sort. Miracles don't prove anything lasting. The reason why we believe in Moshe forever is because of prophecy. Prophecy is it's not just a fancier miracle. It's a different realm of experience. When you have prophecy and you see that God speaks to Moshe, right, and you're able to participate in that prophecy, they never doubt Moshe. And that's why Moshe is the one who gave us the Torah. And that's why we believe in him till this day, that the Torah we have today is the Torah that he got from God, because we know that he's a verified prophet, because we were there to experience his prophecy alongside of him. So back to my point, even if someone does miracles, proves nothing. Even Moshe's miracles doesn't prove that he's a prophet. Go ahead.
What is your name?
Leonard.
Leonard. You made a comment that most Christians don't even know that Jesus was Jewish. I would say 98% of them believe in the Old Testament, though.
They do.
So they know that he was Jewish.
Confront them and ask them a question straightforward. Do you know that Jesus is a Jew? And they're like, what?
I don't think
Really?
that's true.
That's my experience. I'm not saying.
No,
I'm
okay,
not
but I
saying-
think
no,
that
I'm
I
just
would say
saying my experience.
98% of the people that grew up as Christians knew Jesus was a Jew.
Well,
Like,
either
to this
way,
day,
either way. There's a lot more that we could talk about. I have a whole nother class now about all the sources in the Talmud. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But either way, I would advise everyone, if you are interested in that, find your way to my website. I have a whole class in it. I'll send the link out tonight or tomorrow, whatever. But either way, it's not so simple what the Talmud says. A lot of people say, they say, oh, the Talmud says this about that. We did this to Moses, we did to JC, we did that to JC. It's not clear that we even talk about the same JC. There's different time periods. There's a lot of nuance in that discussion. Either way, I think what we achieved today is clarity as to, A, the origins of Christianity and how it kind of fits in with the historical trend that was existing at that time, was a much bigger trend. How it kind of spiraled and became was spun off to being its own religion, and the basic tenets of Christianity that we reject. Why we reject it? Because they actually don't fulfill any of the requirements and none of the prophecies of the Messianic era, of Jesus being the Messiah, of his qualifications personally, or his achievements, accomplishments that he is Messiah is destined to fulfill. He fulfilled none of them. Of course, the notion of a man being to God is actually insane. By the way, I'll tell you one cool thing before we go here. Back in that book that we have, Told Us Yeshu, about the Jewish perspective on the early Christianity, it talks about this guy Shimon Peter, right? That he actually wrote many of the books of the early Christians. Not only that, it says that he actually determined that the books will all be written in Latin, and that the language of the church will be Latin. Not only that, he gave names for the Latin letters, Latin alphabet we have today, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? He gave names for all those letters, and we find, I think it's like a 10th or 11th century Jewish commentary that points out that if you actually look at the ABCs that we have, and you take the first 10 and the last 10, and look at the middle three, you'll find that the middle three letters are. Drum roll, please. One of the middle three letters of the alphabet. L-M-N. Right, in Hebrew. Who knows Hebrew here? L? No. What does the word El mean in Hebrew?
One.
God. Aim. Mother. Aim is a mother. Ain. What does Ain mean? It means none. God has no mother. So essentially, like, he threw in these another pun there, a little Easter egg, so to speak, into the language, saying this whole thing's nonsense. God has no mother. It's not possible for God to have a mother, right? You can't have, anything existing, God being dependent upon anything. How cool is that? Either way, guys, very interesting. But we have a little bit of a picture. Unfortunately, we can't do this other one. But look forward to seeing you guys next time. All the best.
Are you going away?
Yeah.